Some people may not believe this story, and to be honest, I don't really care. It may sound like a cliche story, but you're not thinking that anymore when it happens to you. I grew up in southern Ohio. Depending on your definition, I'm still technically growing, I guess, as I'm an 18-year-old male. But that's not the point. I've lived in the countryside my whole life. In fact, I've never moved from the property, although the house I live in now is one I helped build with my grandfather, separate from the one that was here when we moved. I was only 4, and I didn't do much outside of hammering some nails with supervision. My oldest memory dates back to when I was 3 years old. Me and my mother were walking out of the doctor's office, and the receptionist had me going. I was an excitable little boy. I was always fine with where I lived. I still am, as I live there today, but there have been some incidents that have left me spooked. I guess that would be the correct word. I think the one that stands out the most was my experience with a doll I had that seemed to be based on a family friend named Big John. As the name suggests, Big John was a big dude. He stood about 6'4", and he was built like a tank. But anyone who knew him would tell you that he had a kind heart of gold. He was always dressed like a trucker, but his job was construction, if I'm correct. That's part of the reason why this experience frightens me. The doll looked almost like him, from the trucker's hat to the details in his face. Looking back on it, it's scary how much the doll looked like him. But as I was 3 or 4 at the time, that could just be my memories messing with me. The doll itself was nothing really special. It was a simple plushie doll, like those ones at Kings Island or other amusement parks, the ones modeled after human-looking characters like Superman or Batman. I'd always assumed that the doll was custom-made due to the resemblance, and I remember going to get the doll with my mom and my grandparents. As I was about 3 or 4 years old, my memory's a little hazy. I do know that I had the doll for a good few months, and all I can say now that it's gone is good riddance. The first few days, it was like any other doll. I played with it, acted like it was my friend. I would talk to it. Then things changed. One night, I had a nightmare. See, in the old house we lived in before the new one, my grandpa would always sleep on the massive couch we had. My mom and grandma would share a king-size bed in the only bedroom we had, and I would sleep in between them. And in that room, on my mother's side of the bed, I had a toy box that sat next to it. I couldn't see it if I was laying down due to my small size. As the doll was merely another toy, I would simply toss him in the toy box at bedtime, and that was that. This time was different. In my nightmare, I was being chased by the doll. It was a recurring dream. Big John's features were warped, twisted, however. His friendly smile was gone, and so was the cartoonish eyes. In their place were unnervingly wide eyes and a demonic grin, punctuated by razor-sharp sets of teeth. I'd jump from my bed and run from the bedroom, but I wouldn't make it far. The living room we had was huge, and it was connected directly to the bedroom. I would make it halfway through the living room before turning around to see if I was being chased, and then the doll was on me. Then I'd wake up. The first time I had the dream was the scariest, however. When I woke up, I shot directly up in my bed. My first instinct was to look at the toy box, where I should have been able to see the doll. But it wasn't there. I nearly screamed when I spotted the doll sitting on a chair at the foot of the bed. I know it was on the toy box the night before, because the chair that the doll was sitting on was from our kitchen table, and I'd always say, "Good night, Big John," before hopping into bed. I was scared, as all I could see was that terrifying visage from my dream. I laid back down and jerked the covers over my head. I had the belief that monsters couldn't get me if I hid in the covers, and at the time, I always went to sleep with the cover over my head, just to feel safe. So it was surprisingly easy for me to fall back asleep. I didn't have the nightmare a second time that day, but it always happened when I would go to bed for the night. Sporadically, the doll would go from the toy box to the chair, but that was never guaranteed on any day, so some days I would wake up with the doll still untouched in the toy box. Somehow, I would still play with the doll, But it eventually got to the point where I would see that demonic face on the doll instead of the friendly smile, and I'd throw the doll away from me. The only time I wouldn't throw the doll when it happened was when my grandpa was there while I was playing with it, as I usually played with my toys in the living room. Even though he had a bit of a gut, my grandfather was built like a tank. As he was only in his early 50s, it wasn't hard to see why, as he was a skilled carpenter, construction worker, and other stuff like that. All he needed was one man to help him build an entire house, and it was hard for me to feel scared in his presence. Eventually, the doll was lost. I'm not really sure how or why. Every time I try to remember, it's like it was there and then it wasn't. This may not be the scariest story, and that's not what I'm going for. But to be honest, this isn't the scariest part. A few years ago, I asked all three of them about it. I still remember how it went. Me: "Hey, do you guys remember that Big John doll I had?" Grandma: "Big John doll?" Grandpa: "What are you talking about?" Me: "You know, that old custom doll you guys got me that looked like Big John." They all looked at me funny. Mom: "What?" Grandma: "I don't remember that." Grandpa: "What are you talking about? We never took you to get a Big John doll." I didn't really think much of it when they said they didn't remember it at first, but the implications hit me not long after. I spent months getting terrorized by that thing, and no one remembers. Not even the people who bought it for me. I'm not sure what to think. All I know now is that I wish I could forget the thing.